happy to have you as a guest of this cross-cultural tea break. You are living in Qatar, in the Middle East, in Doha. Tell us what your 10 years have been like. I mean, it's been a cultural kaleidoscope. And I don't even know where to begin because you've lived in Russia, in China, and now living in the Middle East. So it's up to you. Where would you like to begin?
Oh gosh. What I want to say first is that I'm actually living a dream that I had when I was a child, which is that I always loved different languages and different places, but I didn't grow up, my family didn't have a lot of money. So it's just as I got older, I found opportunities that would help me realize my dreams and travel around the world. And what I prefer, I love traveling for a holiday, but I really also love living in a place, because I think when you live in a place, you really get a feeling for, not only the language, but the culture and just the little tiny things that you wouldn't get otherwise when you're just a tourist. London, England, I studied there twice. Russia, in Moscow, where I met you, Marina, and it's such a pleasure to see you again after all these years. Yeah, I lived in Washington, D.C. I'm American, so I worked in Washington, D.C. for many years. I went to Beijing in China, that's where I've spent most of my time abroad. I was there for 6 years total, over two periods. I've lived in Nairobi, Kenya. I'm now in Qatar. Oh, I lived in Ireland as well briefly for a few months. So
Wow,
yes,
so impressive,
yeah.
so impressive. Those of us who lived abroad will agree, I guess, with the fact that when you immerse yourself in a different culture, in a different country, there's so many transformational things happening with you. I mean, they may not be noticeable right away, but you do notice how much you have changed once you leave the country and go someplace else. Like you might go back to your home country and experience the reverse culture shock, which is a very painful thing. I'm sure you have experienced that. Or if you go straight to another country, a different culture to explore, for different reasons, maybe a job opportunity, or just you want to have a break and live somewhere else, you will have a new culture shock there. And again, you will look back on your previous cultural experience and reflect and realize that you've changed. I had a similar one when I lived in the UK. So we have that one in common as well. So I also lived in the UK twice and studied there. And after the UK, I went straight to Japan with a very, very short period in Moscow, basically just changing my suitcases, packing again, and going to Japan for 1 year to work there. So that was like, one country after another. And when I returned from Japan to Moscow, it was another interesting adaptation, a reverse culture shock. But I'll leave that aside and just switch back to you. So you had so many countries in your sort of cultural baggage. It's really, really amazing. It's so hard to pick a country to begin with. Okay, let's begin with Russia, because this is where we met, and this is where you lived for some time. And then after Russia, you went to other wonderful, interesting countries. So we'll go there and talk about them. How did Russia change you? What do you remember from your Russian experience? What did you expect before coming here? So, I mean, I have plenty of questions, but you pick the one that you want to answer.
Well, I had just been in graduate school in the UK, and I was recruited to work in Russia out of graduate school. So I was very, very fortunate to get a job right out the gate. I had a lot of expectations. And the thing is, I am a very visual person. So I often have a visualization of what it's going to be like, what my daily life, like I have a little snapshot in my brain of what my daily life is going to look like. And the thing is, I didn't speak any Russian. The Kremlin is obviously an icon. Red Square is an icon that I grew up with on television in the United States. And to see that for the first time was just awe-inspiring. And as I mentioned, I lived in China for a long time, and I had the same feeling with the Great Wall of China, where you're just like, wow, like this was on my television screen when I was a child, and here I am on the Great Wall or in Red Square. You know, I have to say that because of for some reason, I had expected back in 2005 that more people would speak English in Russia. By the way, I've grown up, and I'm more mature now. I can't go to a country, I've learned, and expect people to speak my language. You know, there has to be some effort to speak the language of the place, which is something I really put an effort in China, because I didn't do that in Russia. So for that reason and some others, I had a hard time adjusting to Russian life. And I love the food, though. I love the food, and the people that I worked with, who were the first Russian people I actually met, were the kindest people I had ever met. And even though, in my perspective, on the outside, when you're at the grocery store, for example, and people are pushing and getting in the way, and they want to get ahead of you, you know, which made me crazy. What I saw on the inside, on people's insides, was just like such a kindness. People would give the shirt off their back to help me. Like, these friends would help me adjust to living in Russia, whether it was to buy a SIM card or to communicate at the bank. Like, some of our colleagues would come with me after work. And, you know, back then, it's almost like I didn't realize how much kindness was given to me, because I was just a new gal who didn't speak Russian. And, you know, here's the funny thing, Marina, is that all these years later, I have not been back to Russia, but I am so interested in Russian culture today that I really, really want to go back and see it with a different pair of eyes. Yeah, I think today I would get a really different point of view. And I'm so interested. So that's very interesting to me.
And the same thing happened to me in Japan. You know, after I've left Japan, I started getting interested in Japanese culture even more, reading about the Japanese culture, studying the Japanese language on my own. And I was so surprised that I left Japan, but Japan was still kind of following me in Russia. And I can absolutely relate to what you were saying, because once you've lived in one country and then you left it, but it's still on your mind, you still want to go back, you want to see it with a different pair of eyes, because the country has changed a lot. Just looking back on the time when you were here and now, it's just, you know, difference between night and day. It's very, very different, because what I see every day here in the streets of Moscow amazes me, how, you know, things change here quickly. So, yeah.
Well, to be honest with you, I spent most of my year in Moscow, and at the end of my year, I was there for a year. And at the end of my year, I went to St. Petersburg with a colleague of mine, and we took the train, which was really cool. And I just remember the floor of the train car had a beautiful carpet, and I just thought, oh my God, this is just so, you know, this is like one of those things that you maybe like see in a movie or something. And, you know, and we ended up talking to, there was a Russian guy in our car, and we were having a chat, and I was with another colleague who spoke Russian, a friend of mine. And what I found about St. Petersburg, by the way, I love churches. Churches are so beautiful everywhere in the world. Anytime I see a church, I'm just like, it's just so amazing. And so, you know, seeing some of the religious, you know, icons in St. Petersburg was beautiful. The fact that I knew nothing about it. It looked very European to me architecturally. I went to the Hermitage Museum, which was amazing. And, you know, it's a shame. I mean, again, like looking back, well, I shouldn't say looking back. I should say going forward. If and when I do come back to Russia, I would very much like to see other parts of the country, because you're right. The city, you know, it's like New York City in the United States. You know, you can go to New York City. It's a great city. It has everything there, but it's not really a representation of the United States. This goes back to what I was saying about living in a country versus being a tourist and just visiting, or even, you know, loving a country and just listening or watching television series. When you live there, you know, you can hear, you know, the language, you can hear the language firsthand. And even if I am not, the best student of Chinese, just by hearing it, and I worked in a Chinese company, so I always heard Chinese as well as English. And just, it's almost like it just sank in, because as I was learning different words and phrases, then I can hear them when people speak them, and then I piece together what somebody is saying. And so I couldn't necessarily respond or comment in Chinese all the time, but I would always shock my colleagues because they'd be speaking in Chinese and then I would respond in English like, oh yeah, I went there last week. And they're like, oh, what? You understand?
She understands everything. We should be quiet and not talk about her.
Exactly. So that was, and I did that for a year. Okay. I mean, I was in China for many more years, but I did it for a year, and that just, at least it gave me a foundation. And I have to say that when you go up to a Chinese person, which by the way is not really done culturally, but in America, we say hi to people, even if it's a stranger. And so I would, once in a while, I see a really cute old guy on the street and I'd say, ni hao. And he'd be like, oh, ni hao. Who's this lady talking to me? But, I think they kind of appreciate it. Chinese people, in my experience, really appreciate it when you make an effort, because it's so important. They're so, they value their culture so deeply. I know every country does, but there's something different about China that sort of stands out in terms of how they value their culture. And so, as a foreigner who had never been to China before, when I moved there, I'd never been there before. I just went. Just like Russia, actually. I'd never been there before either. I just went because that's my sense of adventure. That's what I like to do.
It's brave. That's also very brave. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And it's just who I am. And I remember it was more like observations. To me, China was so exciting because it's like, for me, I could only explain it as take everything you learned in the United States and turn it on its head. Everything you learn and turn it around, because it's the opposite of what you're used to. And, for me, it was like cultural observations. For example, a lot of old people love their dogs, and they often have little dogs, and they're like babies to them. And so it's very common to see a dog in a baby stroller, a pram, with their little elderly owner, which is so adorable. And also, birds are a big part of Chinese ancient culture. And so you often see men on the walking on the road with, on the sidewalk, obviously, with these bird cages. They'd be basically walking their birds in bird cages. And sometimes and I lived in Beijing, okay, so I was in the city, but on the corner of any street, you could find a man cutting someone's hair, like a one-man barber shop. And those little cultural things it made me absolutely fall in love with China. And I love the old people and the dogs. If anybody asks me what I love the most, it's the old people and the dogs. So here's something I learned is that in China, a lot of people they come from the countryside to work in the cities because that's where the factories are and that's where the money is. And sometimes they'll take their children with them and sometimes they'll leave them behind with grandparents. So the place is filled with, they call them migrant workers. And that's different in the United States. In the United States, a migrant worker for us is somebody who comes and works from outside the country and they come to the United States to work. But here we're talking about the countryside versus the city. And back in the day, the countryside, the majority of Chinese people lived in the countryside, but more and more the country urban populations are now balancing out to 50-50, I think, or they're getting close to 50-50, which is very interesting. And it says a lot about how technology and development have brought people into the cities. So there's so many interesting cultural things about China that were just a delight, because it's also different when you go to a country and you haven't read all the books about it and you're going in there just completely fresh and you have no idea. You know a bit about the history because that's what you learned in school, but that's it. Biggest cultural challenges I have had is that as an American, like, we're big on rules. Now, today, these days, COVID-19, 2020, there's a lot of anger about the rules and what they are and who should be following them. But, for me as an American who's traveled around the world, like, rules are a big thing to me. I respect them as much as I can. I get really upset when people break them. But, most of the places I have been to, I've lived in Germany. I didn't know if I mentioned that, but Germany, I mean, they're rules people. But, you know, China, people break the rules all the time because you just, you know, you find a little way to get in there and get what you need and then get out and then you're fine and nobody catches you. So it's funny that the
Yeah,
application
it's
and
interesting how we see things differently, depending on where we come from. Yeah. And also when you experience so many different cultures, you think, okay, so what is the rule? Is there a general rule for everything and for everyone? Or maybe having no rules is a rule, you know? Because my cross-cultural experience taught me to be flexible, but yet, I mean, I also like to respect the rules. But then, you know, in some ways, when you just go by the book all the time, it, you know, may not work all the time. So being flexible, I think, is a great asset. And living in countries like China, Russia, and now in the Middle East, we're slowly getting there. I guess teaches you a lot because you take a lot of new skills on board and new ways maybe of looking at things. You mentioned a very interesting thing that I'm still processing in my mind. You said when you go to a different country culture, you like experiencing it from kind of like clean slate, you know, without any prior preparation. And I admire that because I'm the opposite. I like to prepare beforehand, like read up on the culture, talk to people who've lived there. That could be, you know, that could have its pluses and minuses because when you talk to other people, depending on what experiences they have, of course, you will have different experiences, but their set of experiences may trigger some stereotypes, and you'll be like stereotyping, and we don't want that, right? When we go to a different country, we just want to, you know, build our own experience. But yeah, I admire people who are different than me, like who go just kind of like throw themselves at the deep end. I do a little bit of preparation because I think it helps me in the culture shock stage called the pit of despair when you just kind of like so annoyed with all these cultural differences and new things. So yeah, if you prepare beforehand, that minimizes, you know, the stresses that you have during that stage. But I also want to ask you about the people. What were the people like? I mean, have you made friends for life while living in China? I mean, are you in touch with some of the people that you worked with maybe, or the people that you met while being there, Chinese or expatriates alike?
oh yes, yes. In fact, I have to say, like China, you know, the China opportunity came in 2010, and it honestly transformed my life. I changed a lot when I was living in China, and it's funny because China is one of those places that people either love or they hate it. And the key, and I suppose this goes with every place that you could go. The key is, like you said, like keep an open mind and don't try to change China because China will never change and you need to accept that. There are people who go there and they're just like, what? You know, I can't deal with this. Why do they do it this way? If those are the questions you're asking, maybe that's not the place for you. This is just based on my own experience. I was lucky that I absolutely loved it. So to answer your question, yes, I had friends. I had Chinese friends through work, especially. So I lived there twice. I had a 2-year gap in between. So I lived there for a year and a half or almost 2 years. And then I went back for 4. And the second time I went back, I made some very good friends. I worked on a team of Chinese people and they were young and, you know, we laughed a lot and, you know, cause I like to I have to bring humor to the workplace because humor, by the way, is a great way to break through any cultural barriers. If you can find the laugh, you know? So
True.
yeah. And it was really, I never ever underestimated the value of the fact that I made Chinese friends because it's not, again, it's such a different culture and you have to be, and it's, you know, and it was similar in a way to the, as I described Russia, where
Yeah.
if you're out on the streets, the people just frustrate you. But on the inside, if you make friends with people, they are so wonderful and so kind and giving and just, it's amazing. And so one time I went, I made a friend with this guy and I went to his hometown and I met his parents, his mama and baba, and I met his grandparents. And we played mahjong, which is their traditional game, super
Okay.
fun. I learned to play it. And it was just, I never for a moment forgot about how amazing this experience was. I was present through the whole thing, if you know what I mean. I was mindful about how unique and special this was, that my friend brought me to meet his family and to experience, it was the Lantern Festival. It was very special. So
Yeah.
we're still in touch. I would love to see them again someday. So yeah.
You treasure moments like that because you realize that they are special and what it means for them. They're inviting a foreigner, a newcomer to their house, somebody from a different country, from a different world, yeah, and they're letting you into their lives, into their home, and kind of sharing their daily life with you. So that's absolutely precious and very, very special. So I can also relate to that because I had similar experiences in Japan. Very interesting. Let's move on now. Let's move on to the Middle East, where you're living now. You're in Qatar, in Doha. What is it like for you? I bet it's very different from what you have experienced before.
Well, once again, I had a visualization of what life would be like here because I had some friends who would post some things on Facebook and I'm like, oh, they have a nice life. Oh, it'll be fine. And then I got here and it's funny because I always thought if I could love China, I could probably love anywhere, you know, and because it's a challenge, you know, it's a different culture, but I have had a really, it's taken me 2 years to adjust to life here in Qatar. There's a big dichotomy between the locals, the Qataris, and the foreigners. And, you know, there's a bunch of things that, you know, it's a Muslim country. So there's Friday prayers. The holiday is on the weekend. Their weekend is on Friday and Saturday. Whereas back home in the US and in other places, it's Saturday and Sunday. So that's very interesting. And it's funny because the first time I went to the grocery store here, it was on a Friday at, it was like 11:25 and they wouldn't let me in. And I'm like, what's the deal? What's the problem? And he said, no problem. We just closed for the prayer time. So they closed from 11:30 to 1. So that was funny. I had to go all the way back to my hotel, but that's fine. But you know, it's just, I have never lived in the Gulf. I have been to Doha before because I used to work for my company in the past and I would come here for a few short trips. But it's really, for me, it's been a big challenge. And I don't speak Arabic in case anybody is wondering. No, sometimes the rules apply differently to different groups of people.
Okay.
There are a lot of people who work here. They come here for laborers, and there's different strata of society here that I'm not used to, and some of it to me is a bit unpleasant. And I'm being diplomatic. It's a bit unpleasant. You know, it's when you have a stratified society, I think the treatment of one group to another could be not so great. And I've really struggled with that because I consider myself a pretty open-minded and you know, I don't want to discriminate, and you know, it's not really who I am, and it's just to see things like that makes, you know, it hurts, and it makes me wonder, like, is it a conflict of interest that I'm here, that some of these values are not things that I believe in? But again, this is not my culture, and you know, there are other reasons why I'm here, and you know, so that's been interesting. But I've started to embrace things, you know, a bit more, and it's okay now. But it took me a long time to adjust, which I always underestimate because I've traveled so far. I've gone to so many different places. I always think I'm going to be fine, but it's not always the case. So
It's amazing, isn't it? Because once you've traveled to so many different countries and you lived abroad, you'd think that, oh, I'm a seasoned traveler and I can handle anything. Yeah. If I can, like you said earlier, if I could make it in China, I could make it anywhere. Just looking back on what we've talked about in the past 30 minutes, we've been to Russia, China, Qatar, so many different countries, and so interesting in their own and special way. You've learned certainly a lot of new things about people, about the culture, about yourself. Uh, there will come a moment when you decide to go someplace else. And let's visualize that you're now in a different country. How will you remember Qatar, China, and Russia?
Oh, that's a good question. Qatar, I don't think my memories will be as fond as China. You know, like I said, I had a real metamorphosis in China personally, and that holds a very special place in my heart. I consider China like my second hometown or something, which is, you know, for somebody who hasn't lived there for 20 years, it might be an odd thing to say, but so much happened there that was wonderful. Qatar, I think I like to see every place I go and everything I've done in my life and my career as one thing leading to another. Like it was supposed to be this way. You know, there was a point where I was here and I was like, oh, I want to get out of here. I don't want to live here anymore. I'm not liking it. But, you know, I think what I've learned a lot about myself is, you know, just stick it out and see what happens. And if, you know, later on you feel the same way, you can leave. I can leave anytime. You know, I'm not trapped here. But yeah, I mean, what I'll see about Qatar is that I got through a challenging time and ended up doing really well and actually growing professionally. I've grown a lot professionally in the last few years, a lot. So that's really valuable to me. So that Qatar experience will be more about personal, professional growth. China will be about just uprooting and going to a really wonderful place and going through a transformation in my own life. Russia was the start to my TV career. And without that experience, you know, of being in a place sight unseen, without speaking the language, I knew a lot of people who went over there with me, you know, out of our graduate school. But, you know, again, I got a glimpse of Russian life and culture. And I do feel a sense of pride. I know our old channel just celebrated an anniversary. And to be a part of that is actually kind of cool in hindsight. So, you know, at least it planted an interesting seed, and then I have something to compare Russia with if and when I get to go back someday.
Rod, what advice would you give to some younger Americans who just like finishing schools, you know, graduating and thinking of maybe exploring the world, or maybe sort of wondering whether they should go elsewhere or should travel abroad or not? What advice would you give them? What recommendations would you give them?
There is no better way to learn more about yourself and your country than to live in another country, to go to another country. You really get a perspective about who you are and where you come from. That is the most important thing. And also, I think, again, keep an open mind. And, you know, there's a saying in English, they say the world is your oyster. And I don't know where the oyster reference comes from, but somebody told me that when I was in college and I was thinking of going to London to study. And that experience transformed me so much, because I was just a small town American girl and I had no idea, you know, what was coming ahead. And I think when people go abroad, it's the adventure of a lifetime. Even if you're just a tourist and you're going to a place you've never been, you know, that takes a lot of courage and bravery. The other thing is, and this is really important because we're human beings and this is what we do. We love to, you know, if I'm Russian and I go to the United States to study, I'm going to find the other Russian students and I'm going to hang out with them. It's just how we are. But I would encourage people to just, try to get involved with people from other countries or from the country you're in, because there's no better experience. And you never know, you might get an invitation to come to their home and to meet their family and see what their local town is like. And it's a wonderful experience. I'm so grateful to have done all the things that I've done, starting with my first travel abroad.
Jennifer, thank you so much. It's been such a great time talking to you and learning about all these cultures. For me, it's been like traveling to all these places. Now that our travel opportunities are limited, it was fun, like to see and experience those places virtually, you know, through you. I definitely learned a lot, and I'm sure that the people who have been with us or who will be watching this broadcast later will learn a lot of new things. So thank you very much for sharing your stories, your very, very interesting and exciting life experiences with us here. So we've been to Russia, China, Qatar. What's next? Who knows? Yeah, we'll find out later, and we'll have another live maybe, and talk about your new culture, your new experience, personal and professional. So thank you so much for being here on Cross Cultural Tea Break. Still have some jasmine tea there.
Yes, I've got my pumpkin.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much
so
for
much.
asking me.